Hello everyone and welcome to my UDK tutorial series. In this particular episode, I'm going to be going over triggers. Now, if you've seen any of my cinematic tutorials or maybe even my Kismet Basics tutorial, you've seen triggers in action, but I've never actually discussed in detail what they do and the kinds of triggers that are available. I just use them as a means of explanation of something else. But this tutorial will focus strictly on triggers themselves. So, to get a trigger into the level, if you don't already know, just right-click and you can use the context menu for this one. You can just go to Add Actor and Trigger, and you'll get a trigger right there in the level, fine and dandy. But to stick with tradition, I will go ahead and show you how to get to it through the actor classes. You have a trigger right there. We'll spawn in the exact same thing. But we also have 4 subtypes of triggers, which are used for very specific cases. I'm not going to go over the individual triggers that are here because they do the exact same thing as the generic trigger does that we're about to talk about. So I'm not going to talk about each one individually because that would just be unnecessary amount of time wasted. But they're self-explanatory. I mean, the trigger dynamic, it's dynamic. It can move around. The trigger pawns only. It only accepts input from pawns, meaning like the player and AIs and stuff like that. So pretty self-explanatory. And if you don't know, the terminology of this stuff, then you probably don't need it because, for instance, trigger streaming level, you're only really going to use for more advanced stuff having to do with like multiple levels and level streaming and loading them in and stuff like that. So you're not even going to need that early on. But anyway. Let's get down to business here. So you'll notice whenever you've got this trigger in here that you've got this sort of like light switch, or even it could be considered like a lever in the floor type looking thing with an orange and black box. And then if we click on it, we've got this like green collision area around it. And basically what this is going to do is that whenever we interact with this thing, it's going to send out a Kismet signal that we can then use to activate other things. In the case of the cinematic tutorials that I've done, we've used it to do a matinee event, which is then what I ended up talking about. But basically, in this case, we could do all sorts of things. Now, before I get started with kind of explaining some of this, I'm going to kind of drag it into the middle of this box here, just so that I know where it is on the level. I'm going to sort of put it from the middle of this box and go out a little bit. And we are actually going to have to increase the size of this because it's rather small. And if you didn't already know, we have to be inside of this green cylinder for it to actually activate. So it's only going to be listening for input in the inside of this green cylinder here. So let me do the height for 150 and the size for about 350. I already measured this out earlier when I was testing around with some stuff. So there we go. It's about as tall as the box here, and pretty wide enough out from the center of the circle to allow us to get an easy input. So, alright, now the rest of these options that are here, besides the collision height and the collision radius, you don't even need to worry about. Most of them don't really need to do, don't really even do that much to do with Kismet stuff anyway, so you can just close that. Now, let's head into Kismet. Now make sure you still have this trigger selected whenever you go into Kismet. And if we right click, you should see the options down here at the bottom of creating a new object variable using the trigger and new event using the trigger. Now, because I've been doing some testing, mine says 7, but yours should say 0, trigger 0 for your trigger if it's the first time that you've created one recently. I've created quite a few of them and doing some testing, so it just counts up every time you do a new trigger. It'll start at 0 and then go up, so I've done 8 of them total. Alright, anyway, we don't really want to do an object variable using triggers, pretty much never, because you don't want them to be variables. They don't really have any information in them that you can store, and you can't use them as like a storage medium for numbers. That's what ints and doubles and stuff are for. And you can't use them for true-false values. They don't really have inherently anything that you want to use for variables. You want to use them as event triggerers, which is why they're called triggers. So we can use touch, destroy, take damage, hit wall, anim notify, which is animation notify, mobile input touch actor, and used. I'm going to use touched for the sake of this tutorial because it's a little easier to demonstrate. And I will go over some of the others, but just for right now. Now, mobile input touch actor, just real quick, that is actually used if you're making a mobile game. So if you want to try using this on like a mobile situation, that would be like the player touching the screen or something. It's a mobile input. It's touch screen mobile input type thing. So that's what that is. But anyway, the rest of these can be used for PC. The most commonly used ones is touch and used. Technically, destroyed and take damage can't even work for a trigger. Those are just there by default because of the way that in the inheritance and the code and stuff works. It inherits these from them, but they can't actually inherently take damage because they're not an entity that you can attack. So most of these can't even really apply to the trigger except touched and used and then mobile touch actor. So, but anyway, we have touched here. We have all kinds of different variable types. We have 4 to begin with: touched, untouched, empty, and instigator. Now, touched and untouched are pretty self-explanatory. When you go into the actor, it's touched. When you're inside this, when you're inside this cylinder area here, it's considered it touched. So you're touching the Kismet trigger there. But when you're outside of it, it's considered untouched. Okay? Now, empty, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it does. I couldn't find any documentation on it, and I've tried getting it to activate, but I can't find a way to get it to activate. So I have no idea what empty does. Touched and untouched, I don't really even know why you would even need a third one, because you have inside and you have outside. There's really no other way to have anything else. So anyway, your instigator is basically what's going to be causing the event. Now, you would automatically assume, if you're new to this, well, the thing that's causing the event is the trigger. Isn't that what the instigator is? Why do we need a variable for it? But technically, the player would be causing the event to happen, not the trigger. The trigger is receiving the input from the player. The player is causing the input to be heard. Hopefully that makes sense. So if we wanted to add an instigator, we would add a player instigator, because that's what's going to be touching this. Now, if we had AIs or something in here, we would have to consider that maybe the AIs would be able to interact with this trigger, and so in that case, we would have to just do all pawns. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. That's a little bit more advanced and self-explanatory. But your instigator is going to be what is going to be activating the actor or the event. I'm getting all my words mixed up. I apologize. The instigator is going to be the actor that is causing the event to happen and the trigger to be fired. There we go. So you don't even have to actually have one, but sometimes it's useful to have one because then you can use that variable in other situations. In this case, I'm not going to bother with adding one in right now. But we can, with this touch trigger, we can add in a matinee, which, again, if you've seen any of the cinematic stuff that I've done, tutorials and stuff, you know all this part all too well. But I can select this mesh here. I've already created a interp actor for it. Do empty group, temp for temporary, and movement track. And then we just go over here and move it up a little bit and over. Sure, why not? So there we go. We've got this movement done. And if we close this and hit play, as soon as we walk up to this, it should start moving. It is not for... Oh, we didn't set it up to be. Forgot to do that. Okay, if we move this here. Okay, so I forgot to actually set the most important part up, but if we take the touched variable here and we attach it to something like play, as soon as we are inside the collision area, it will play this animation. So we can walk up here, bam, it's going to start playing it, and there it goes. And then if we walk outside, it doesn't really do anything, and we can walk back in and it doesn't really do anything either, because it's already played the animation and it's in the play position. So we have to have it come back somehow, which is why we can use the untouched to reverse it. And then we can head back in here and it'll play, and if we step out, it doesn't do anything at all. Now, why is that? Well, one thing that you have to make sure that you think about is that there is a option in here in the trigger. If we go down here to the options, there's these down here. We have touch types, which you don't need to worry about actually, unless you're doing some more advanced things. We can go to sequence event, and there's a max trigger count. Currently, it's the default is set to 1, so it can only fire once. Personally, I think the default should be 0, which is an infinite number of times, because that's what most people end up setting it to anyway, but whatever. If you set this to 0, the touched, untouched, play, reverse thing should work fine, because you walk into it and then 0 being an infinite is sort of an infinite number in this case. It's kind of counterintuitive, because you think, well, the max trigger count is nothing, it can't actually play now, but you can't actually put infinity, and you can't put negative numbers either, because that would just screw everything over. So 0 acts as the infinity, and you can do it an infinite number of times. Now the retrigger delay, this is separate from the trigger count. It doesn't actually matter if you only have a maximum number of one count, Words. Good English spoken me by today. Okay. The retrigger delay. That's how many times you can trigger this trigger before you can't trigger it again within a certain number of seconds. So right now it's set to 0.1 seconds, so I can step in and out of the trigger every 0.1 second, and then it resets itself. So if you wanted to have like a door or something that can only be opened every 5 minutes, well, you would set that to however number of seconds 5 minutes is. I can't do math right now. 5 times 60, well, dang it, I got 300 seconds? I think, yeah, 300 seconds, something like that. You'd set that to 300 seconds, then it would only be able to be activated again every 300 seconds, because the retrigger delay is set to that. So that's how that would work. And keep in mind that that is in addition to any delays that we set on the actual modules here, if we want to add them. So, I mean, that's entirely up to you, but that does stack with this retrigger delay as well. Okay, let's head back into here, and if we head up to this, it'll activate, and we can step out, and it'll go back down, and in, and out, in and out. And if you notice, because it's 0.1 retrigger delay, I can just kind of step in and out like this. Let me set the retrigger delay to be a little bit higher, like 4 seconds. And now, if I step in this, it'll go up, 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 step out, it'll come back down, but I step in again. See, I can't do this. Here, let me step all the way out. It'll go in, out, in. See, it wouldn't let me retrigger it for a certain amount of time. Now, if you're wondering, the retrigger effect isn't working for the untouched, because technically, that's a separate input. it's not the same event, but the retrigger delay only works for the same event. So it's looking at a different event whenever it sees untouched. So let's see, if I step out of this and step in, it's not going to do anything. And I can step back in. Untouched, and then it's not going to do anything for a certain amount of time. And the untouched still didn't work, and then I can step back in. So you also have to consider that untouched and touched are separate events. So you can still trigger the untouched even if the retrigger delay for the touched is on cooldown. So that's another thing. And again, I mean, if you need to, you can just set delays in the animation sequence itself so that you can't just like activate the touched and untouched every, couple seconds like I was, where you just can walk out immediately. It can be on a cooldown if you wish it to. That's an option. But anyway, so that's basically the touched actor. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can use this for anything you want to. You could really, get rid of this animation entirely. You could set up like, let's see, I don't know. Upon touching a thing, you could subtract from a float value if you wanted to. So you could do touched in, let's see, new variable, float, a untouched, subtract float. Let's see. Got to set this up now. There's got to be, let me see if there's a slightly easier one to do. This take a little bit of setup. Math, let's see. Dang it. Announcement, here we go. Play announcement. So we could do touched, play announcement, and then set the announcement sound and the announcement text, and then it would just play an announcement sound with the text, every time we touch it, and it's untouched. So let's see, we can just do, and then if I grab out of the content browser, let's just grab the first sound that's there, and it's not actually playing anything. Why is that the case? Let me try something. Okay, announcements are freaking buggy and they don't want to work right, because this should be working, but it's not. Anyway. Oh wait. Ow. Whatever. At any rate, you get the picture. You can do touched, it plays something. Untouched does something else. Anyway, on to the next thing. So we can use. Let me reselect. Unfortunately, sometimes I run into this stuff where it doesn't want to work correctly, even though it's worked in the past for me. So I apologize for that. Anyway, we can do used if we want to. Basically, the way this is it'll use, you have to go within the cylinder, but then it's listening along the used parameter, not the touch. So we can walk in and out of it all we want to, but we have to actually press a key, or quote unquote use the trigger. So we have the used and the unused, which is the exact same as touch and untouched. So we can turn it on and then turn it off. If it's been activated, we can do something. If it's not been activated, we can do something else. So the default key, I believe, is E, which you can change in one of the .ini files, which is in the middle of the UDK folders. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it's E by default. So let's see if we can get some sort of action that we can do. Hmm. Let's see. Okay, now that'll take some setup. Alright, I'll just do another freaking matinee because that'll be easy to demonstrate. Alright, that's fine. No, I didn't want to close Kismet. That's whatever. Shouldn't have gotten rid of my other matinee. Oh well. Okay, movement. Track. Bam. Straight up, because I don't care. And there we go. So now I just got to set this up. So if we use the E key, which is again by the default, and then that'll be fine. We can do this. Walk up here. Now, it's not actually activating yet, even though we're inside, but if I hit E, let's see. No, I know what the problem is. Okay, this also has options. So first of all, I'm going to set the retrigger delay to be 0. But then, okay, aim to interact. I don't want this on because we're in such a large radius. The aim to interact is usually best if you're going to have the trigger area be a smaller section. So basically like a light switch, because you're going to walk up right next to the light switch. You have the trigger volume be large enough that the player is just within, because they don't have to be fully inside. As long as they're close enough, as long as just a little part of them is inside, it'll technically be okay. And then they just walk up to it, hit the E thing, or whatever to interact with it, and then they're fine. But they have to actually be aiming at where the trigger itself is positioned. So that's something you have to keep in mind. They have to be inside the cylinder and then also aiming at the actual trigger if this is selected. If it's not, all they have to do is just be within inside the collision area. So it wouldn't matter. So I'm going to hit the play button. That's why it wasn't working earlier. And E. Pretty sure it's E. Maybe it's not E. Should be E. What is the freaking key? Interact, text, touch types, dun, dun, dun. Okay, maybe let me set an instigator. Hang on. Player. And minimize. There it goes. Okay. Now it's working. I just had to set the instigator. So, there we go. So that was one example. I'm sorry, I forgot that was what you had to do for that one. It's one example where the instigator can come in handy because essentially we're telling it that the player is going to be the one giving it the input, so it'll then listen to the player. We didn't actually have to do that so much with the touch thing because it was just listening to see if it was going to be interacted with and something was going to enter inside of it that, you know, wasn't already there. But in this case, we're having to listen to a specific input from someone. So the all players is the instigator that we need to use in this case. So usually, just out of good practice, it's good to just add an instigator even if you don't think you need it, because then it'll just solve the problem that's already there. Even if you do end up needing it, it'll just kind of solve that problem like I needed it here. So that's usually good practice to just go ahead and add one even if you don't think you need it. So alright. Basically that's how the used trigger works. You just, you know, and again, the key is E to use it, but that can be changed, and you can set this to be different things. You know, if you're doing like some programming and stuff in Unreal Script, you can set it up so that you can use different keys for different triggers if you want to do that. That just requires a little bit of programming and some Kismet and Unreal Script doodling and finessing to get to work correctly. But you don't have to use just one key for these used triggers if you don't wish to. So anyway, on to the next thing. let's get rid of this trigger entirely. Alright, just all of you gone. I'm going to get rid of this trigger entirely, and I'm going to use this actor to actually do some fancy stuff. So, dang it, I should have kept the freaking animation. I always keep deleting my animations and I need them. Oh my gosh. Okay, matinee. Well, I'll have to redo the animation anyway because I lowered this, so it's okay. So we'll do empty group temp again, movement, and there, bam. Okay, so that's fine. Now, we don't have anything to actually activate this yet, but we don't even need a trigger to do this, technically. We can use this mesh itself. So, this is set to be an interp actor, right? Yes. Okay. So, if we open up Kismet and we right-click here, we can use this as a variable if we wish to, but we can also use this as an event. Now, if we go touch, again, most of these, see these right here, we could use them if we want to, but those are just all inherited by the very fact that this is just an actor. The mover one is the one that we want to use. This is unique to the interp actor itself, and this already came with a matinee thing, which I forgot it did. That's okay. I can just do upon attached play, upon detached reverse. Actually, hang on, mover. So it goes to, I don't need U2. So let's see. Open now. Open finished. Reverse, hit actor, change direction. There. Okay, now that's set up correctly. And I've got it to the animation. Okay. So as you saw, when you do the mover, it actually comes with a matinee thing already, because technically what you're going to be using the mover for is you're going to be detecting whether or not something is interacting with this interp actor, and then you're going to want that interp actor to move, because it is in fact an interpolation actor, which means it's going to be moving. That's the whole purpose for it. That's why it already comes with a matinee attached and made for you. So if you look here, when the pawn is attached, it's going to play. If the open is finished, it's going to reverse. Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that whenever it's done playing, it's just going to automatically start reversing, because the pawn attached will still be true when it's done playing, even if it's trying to reverse. So basically, if I'm still standing on this thing, whenever it's done playing, it's not going to immediately start reversing, because the pawn attached is still true. As soon as that is not true, open finished will be able to reverse. And then if the actor is hit, it'll change direction. That's what's set up by default. And again, you have instigator and actor hit. So basically the actor that will be hit being like by projectile or melee weapon of some kind. It's interacted with and attacked, or just interacted with in some way other than just stepping on it. But pawn attached doesn't have to necessarily be stepping on it, but you just have to be on the mesh, so to speak. So usually you could use this as like the floor of an elevator. You could then move the entire elevator up whenever this is called, because the bottom of the elevator could be the one that is looking for this. Or you could use the entire elevator mesh. You're inside it. You're still attached to it. If you have some way of, I don't know, climbing, like if you have like a rope or something in your game, and you're grappling on the side of a building, I don't know, just making stuff up. The building, you would be attached to like the side of the building, so the building could do something then. I don't know. As long as you're attached to the mesh in some way, and that doesn't have to be literally like holding on to it. You just have to be considered solely. You have to like be on top of it, in it, near it, or not necessarily near it, but touching it and interacting with it in some way. So then it will do stuff. So basically, if we run in here and jump on top of this, it should go... Oh, okay, this is an important step as well, which is part of the problem. This doesn't actually have any collision. So if it doesn't have collision, it can't actually detect whether or not I'm attached to it. So if I set it to block all, this should then work. There we go. So now we're going up, and we're all the way over here, and I'm still on top of it. It's done moving. Oh, and then, okay, so it still goes back. Noted. I didn't actually know that that was going to work like that. I thought it didn't do that according to what I was messing around with. Well, we can change that. We could do pawn deattached, reverse. And then that won't be the case. So if we step on this, it'll go up, and then it'll just sit there until we decide to get off. It's not going to do anything. It's completed, but we're still on it, so it's just going to stay there. And then we can hop off, and it should go back to its position. There it is. And we can do the same thing. And we can hop off, and we can get on, and we can go. Now notice the point of when it starts moving. As soon as I lose contact with this mesh, it's going to stop moving. But if I touch the side of it, right? If I touch the side of it, it'll stop. And I'm deattached, and I actually stopped the entire mesh right there because it was hit. See, hit actor, change direction. So it changed direction, and then it stopped. It didn't know what to do after that. So again, I'll show that again. I accidentally showed that a little earlier than I wanted to, but that's okay. So as soon as I'm going to step off of this thing, it's going to start going down. But then because it is colliding, because it has collision, the side of this is going to bump into me. And then it's going to stop. It's going to change direction, go back, and then just stop. It's going to just sit there. Now, I'm not technically attached to this by touching the side of it. I'm not technically attached to it, but if I was inside of it, or if I was on top of it, I would then be able to jump back off to reinitiate, because I would reinitiate the entire process, you see. Because what happened is I was on it, so it hit the play. And then I got off, so it's like, okay, deattached, reverse. But then this was called, and it changed direction. Because it's not going to then just keep calling deattached every single time I'm not on it. It's not constantly looking for that. It's only going to call deattached if there was something originally attached to it. It's not like, this is not like the trigger, like a normal trigger for touch. Because touch is whenever you're inside, untouched is on the outside. And it will be calling untouched often, so you can play an animation if something is not within the inside of the trigger. But this is only going to play pawn deattached if something was originally attached to it, which is why it's just the box was just sitting there and not going back. So that's something to consider. Now, if we open this up, we don't really have many options. So this is a stay open time. So this is one reason. This is 1.5 seconds. Let me break this. And break this. All right. Let's get back on this thing. If I hop back on this, this is going to go up. And then, like before, it's going to, after a certain amount of time, go back down. Now, you notice that there was a pause there. It was just kind of sitting there, not doing anything for a couple seconds. That was because of this stay open time right here. If we set this to 0, what will happen is that as soon, the very second that this animation is done playing, it's going to reverse the animation. So it's going to go up all the way. And, oh, I'm sorry, 0. That doesn't actually work because 0 is representative of an infinity amount of time, so we do 1.0 or 0.1. See, I even make mistakes sometimes. I'm a noob. Okay, so this is going to go up, and it's going to take 0.1 seconds, and then it's going to start heading back down. So it's not quite as long as a delay there. So now it instantly detected. We don't have sort of like a waiting time for the bottom there. It's just going to instantly detect that, okay, the pawn's still attached, so I'm going to replay the thing, and then it's just going to keep going back and forth. And we could really even set this this to be like 0.00001 if we wanted to make it even shorter. And then that'll still accomplish the same goal. So it'll just kind of, still do pretty much the same thing. It's still waiting just a little bit for it to like completely finish, but we could set this to like 5 if we wanted to, and then hit play. And then when we're on top of this, it'll wait about like 5 seconds before going all the way back down. So adjusting like really small increments of the decimal isn't going to do too much because it's still going to have a bit of a delay. And notice that it's actually waiting even once the pawn is considered attached. It's still waiting for that 5 seconds before it re-triggers it. So you could sort of consider that a re-trigger delay if you wanted to. It's not technically what it is, but in a way, that's what we can analyze it to be equivalent to, is a re-trigger delay. Technically, it's just the stay open time. So, but anyway, that's basically how the interp-actor mover works, and this will work for anything that you create to be an interp-actor. You could make an entire like castle mesh, as long as it's one mesh, and you convert it to an interp-actor, which you have to do if you're going to be using for Matinee anyway. You can do this. You just have to select it, come into Kismet, and just do the new event mover. Now touch doesn't really do very much, because technically touch is like being on the inside of it, so that's not really going to work all that well with collision and stuff. Again, that's just inherited sort of abilities due to the fact that that is able to be worked with every mesh. But you could do touch with another type of volume or something, like a light mass importance volume. You could actually use touch, and if they're inside the light mass importance volume, do something if you wanted to, because they're on the inside of it, they're touching it. And that actually forelays into my next thing, and this time I'm not going to get rid of the animation. However, I will actually delete this. Don't need that. So that forelays what I was saying earlier directly into the next thing, which is going to be the trigger volume. Now okay, so this is of course alphabetized, so if we go down all the way down here to the T's, trigger volume, there we go. Now we have to, of course, with any volume, you have to use the builder brush to select the area that you want to make the volume in, and then it just adds it right there. So I can move this builder brush, and I'm going to have this green sort of square here, and this is going to be the equivalent of a trigger, but instead it's a customizable volume instead of like a cylinder type thing. So if I hit F4, you can see that I don't really have that many options. The rest of this is, again, sort of inherited things that are part of just every actor. The volume section, it's just got the two things. So process all actors, basically, should I process every single thing that goes into this volume, or the forced pawn walk? Can they only be allowed to walk in this thing? Which you can use, and that may seem kind of a weird thing to have, because, well, I'm not really making a game that's going to have people flying, but you have to consider that this is got all of the Unreal Tournament stuff in it, which does have some capabilities of flight in it. So that's what this means. So basically, if they're inside of this, are they forced to walk? So you can integrate this with fairly easily with other things. And if you add something else like, force pawn to not have weapon or something inside of this, you could do that as well. But that's completely different than what I should be talking about. So anyway, once you have this selected, right click in here, and you can do a variable if you want to, or touch, take damage. So you could do either one of those. I don't even know why take damage is even an option there, but apparently volumes can... I guess that would be if it detecting damage that is done to anything within the volume. I don't know if that counts or not, but anyway, we can use touched and untouched, and it's pretty much the same concept, but it's just like a customizable volume that you can use instead of like a trigger. So because the cylinder can be kind of inaccurate at times, because you can't get, like, if you have a square room, you're going to have to make the cylinder big enough to get the corners, but then if you do that, it's going to be sticking out in some sections, and you don't want it to activate when because if you have rooms all around there too, it could be kind of annoying to have to deal with a circle in a square room. Round peg in a square hole kind of thing isn't going to work. But this is customizable, and you can use the builder brush on it. So I could do this. I could, let's see. I could do this, and then extrude this corner out, and then I got like this funky looking shape like that. So you can, anything you can make with CSG, you can do to pretty much any volume at all, because you can use the builder brush on it. So you can make this into some really customizable shapes. Again, you can only use the touch thing, the touched event on it, but that's the only thing you would really need a volume for, because you can't use a volume to specify a use, because where would you use it at? There's no like central point. It's going to be incredibly hard to find the central point of an entire cube. You would have to pinpoint that exactly, so it's going to be very difficult. But anyway, that is about all I have for triggers. Hopefully, you have found that somewhat entertaining. Well, maybe not as entertaining as educational. That was the word I'm searching for. I cannot speak today. It's terrible. I do want to say I'm trying to record enough backlog, but I've got work for about 2 weeks. I'm gonna be going on a work trip for about 2 weeks, so I may or may not be able to get as many videos uploaded as I would like, but I'm gonna try to get some backlog done. So any questions and stuff, I may be a little delayed in answering, or comments, I may be a little delayed in seeing them due to the fact I'm going to be working from about 5:30 in the morning to about 8 at night every day for 2 weeks. But at any rate, I will try to get to them. So again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in another video. By the way, I did forget to mention this one small little detail. Because you have to create the volumes for this like trigger actor with the builder brush, you can actually create this in any shape that you want. The cones or the cylinders or sheets or whatever you want to do it in, because you can change the different shapes. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a cube. You could do anything that you really wish to do with this. So I just wanted to kind of bring that one little thing up. You could even make a cylinder if you wanted to, and just use this because it's a little bit more of a customizable cylinder because it has multiple sides to it. But that's entirely up to you. Okay, now I will actually be really going now that I said that one little thing. Okay, hopefully I don't forget anything again.